Final Fantasy. For this video I won't be including the MMORPGs nor any of the spin-offs out there, although I have to admit that most of them don't really have great battle mechanics aside from the legendary Final Fantasy tactics. I could have chosen that one, but you guys know me, I'm not the biggest fan. So which main Final Fantasy has the best combat? I actually consider Final Fantasy X simply because it doesn't have the active time battle system. That's right, you can take your time deciding what your characters will do. And while it does have its interesting features, it honestly doesn't stand out that much. It's great, sure, but it's just a regular everyday turn-based combat. So I went for my favorite game in the series, Final Fantasy IX. You've noticed I'm not the greatest fan either of the active time battle thing, which pressures the player to choose their character's actions as fast as possible because battles are played on real time. I think it's a bother, to be honest. Despite that, however, I picked 9 for a few number of reasons. First, it went back to having 4 party members instead of 3 like 7 and 8 did. Second, because it went back to having a 2-player co-op mode, unlike its 2 predecessors. Third, because it has a better interface than them, at least much better than Final Fantasy VIII. I mean, it's far easier to understand, interact with, and enjoy. The trances were a very cool idea as well. They actually happen somewhat often, so I was always looking forward to them. The more attacks you receive, the faster their bar will fill up. And I just love doing massive damage to the enemy with some of my characters. Unfortunately, trance doesn't carry over for the next battle. It's automatic and you can't control it, so characters trance immediately when their bar fills up. That kinda sucked, but it didn't really bother me that much. In the end, all I have to say is that this battle system is great, but in my humble opinion, none of the battle mechanics in any main Final Fantasy title are that great, at least not compared to some of the other JRPGs out there, including the ones we've seen in this series of videos. All of the Persona main games have been turn-based, even its RPG spin-offs on the 3DS. Which one has the best combat? Well, unlike Final Fantasy, the battle mechanics in this series has always been better with each entry, so it's safe to assume that Persona 5 has the best one of them all. My favorite is Persona 3. I belong to a very small minority of people who actually enjoyed its battle system, even though you couldn't directly control your party members. That was gone in the PSP version, so it resembled more the combat in Persona 4. Both games have really cool systems, but I do think Persona 5 is slightly better. My reasons are very few, as a matter of fact, because there's not that much of a difference between them. For once, I thought the baton pass feature was pretty cool. It was so useful when you wanted to exploit the enemy's weaknesses and needed another character to do it. This way, you would achieve the all-out attack faster. I guess the fact that they can use gun attacks is also interesting. It's a small detail to spice things up is all. And then there's the hold up feature. If all enemies are down, you can change the all-out attack to enter negotiations. If the main character is on the same level or higher than the demon you want to recruit, it's a guarantee they'll join. You couldn't recruit them back then in previous games, right? Well, now you can, like in the normal Shin Megami Tensei games. Difficulty felt more balanced than at least the 2 previous games. The vanilla versions of Persona 3 and 4 were quite a challenge even on normal mode. Persona 5 still engages the player on normal, but it balances more the disadvantages and the penalties. Most other characteristics of this battle system are just like in the previous games, so that's it. Honestly, you can't go wrong with either system. I just felt Persona 5 had some small extra features that made the combat more fun, which is why I think it's the best system in the series. There's 3 Dragonguard games and 2 Nier games so far. All part of the same universe, however disconnected they may seem sometimes. Each and every one of them is fast-paced hack and slash, although I always felt the first one was slower than the others. The second game is more balanced, which I think it's the best one out of the 3. And the third one was crazy, chaotic, and disastrous half of the time. Nier Gestalt is my favorite in the series, and I love its battle mechanics as well. But I have to admit that Automata tops them all almost by a landslide. You're fighting with light-speed androids all the time, so of course the fighting had to be extremely fast-paced, right? Hell, it even feels that way when using the bigger and bulky weapons. And I know the Dragonguard games had their dragon battles, which were basically third-person shooters with questionable cameras and controls. Nier got rid of that, but introduced a fine mix of shoot-'em-up elements. In fact, Automata has several missions that involve these shooters, and they control surprisingly well. Not exactly 2D, horizontal, vertical, nope, completely in 3D. I'm not a fan at all of these types of games because I get lost in DC occasionally, but these bullet hell missions were very fun to play. In addition to the enjoyable hack and slash, the androids have these little machines called pods at their control. You'd think having them shoot will stall your character or your own vision, but nope, you can do both at the same time, quickly mastering the controls. Sure, it's hard to pay attention at every single thing going on the screen when this happens, but like I said, it's no big deal. Especially because the camera, something very important in action RPGs, shows everything nicely. It doesn't move around like a freaking tornado and it's easy to control. Another neat feature of it is that it changes perspective on certain areas, going from side-scrolling or top-down view even. Something previously introduced in Gestalt but way more polished here in Automata. Also similar to the Flash Guard in the Ys series, if you successfully evade an attack, you become invulnerable for a short period of time, also doing massive damage when you time your counterattacks. Finally, each of the three main characters has their own extra forte. 2B can handle 2 weapons, and you can switch to them at any time. 9S has these lunatic hacking missions, which are a variation of a top-down view shoot-'em-up, and A2 can sacrifice health to boost her attack power. No wonder this game was a huge commercial success. It's not only because of the sexualized female androids, but also because the combat is just so goddamn great. Grandia is a cult classic series that's nowadays dormant. Only 7 games were released, including a Japan-only MMORPG. So out of the 4 titles we did get, which one has the battle system? The first game led the basis of the influential combat of the series, and it simply evolved from there. So once again, I believe choosing the last in the franchise is the best of them all, Grandia 3. Go ahead and trash the story and characters if you want to, just let me remind you we're discussing the battle system here. Going all the way from the first game to this, it was perfected. The controls, menus, and interface alone are enough reasons to crown it above Grandia 2 or Extreme, but they're almost the same system. Except Grandia 3 changed the meter gauge to a dial one, which was now circular, so time and distance affect the overall battlefield. The dial shows both the characters and enemy icons, depending on the actions they will select and execute, and depending on the agility, as usual, the faster their turn will come. After the action is selected, their icons will have to go through the red bar of the dial. Magic, skills, and criticals progress slowly during this period of time. Normal attacks, also known as combos, are an execution of 2 strikes that usually move faster. But if you select a critical and it's executed faster than the enemy's action in the red gauge, you will be able to completely cancel whatever move they had planned. Certain skills can also cancel or delay the enemy attacks. Sometimes, skills and magic can delay the enemy's attacks, but they can also do the same to you. For example, if one enemy starts casting magic and gets attacked, your other character can do a critical. Their icon will overtake the red gauge and manage to cancel it. So there's a little bit of strategy and timing involved to really exploit this game's battle system. Last but not least, the aerial attacks. If a combo is performed during an enemy that's temporarily suspended in the air, an aerial attack is executed by the other character. Obviously, you need to have both characters having selected the same enemy to attack. These are the neat features that made me choose this battle system over the previous games in the series. So those are my reasons why I think it's the best. You know how the Phantasy Star series completely changed, like Final Fantasy, from turn-based to action? After the first saga on the Master System and Genesis was over, Phantasy Star Online came into existence. Sega wanted to try the console MMORPG trending back then. Most of their titles from both the Online and Universe saga also included campaign modes. And yes, they were full stories like any other action RPG out there. So which one has the best battle system of them all? Let's take out the action games first because it'll be faster, you'll see why. Leaving the recent release of Online 2 out because it doesn't really have an offline story mode, I'm gonna choose Nova. It was originally released on the Vita and never came out of Japan. I did play it for a little bit, but I got stuck quicker than I expected because I just don't understand Japanese, so I couldn't progress any further. Therefore, I can't properly explain the system. All I remember is that the controls felt better than the 4 previous games of the Universe saga or the initial Online games. And out of the Universe saga, I think Portable 1 and 2 are the epitome of the system. However, it's best to play them on a PS Vita than on the PSP with its clunky and small joystick. But you know what? We're judging this series as a whole, so both turn-based and action have to compete just like I did with Final Fantasy. So only one game can come out the winner. It's predictable, but my pick is Phantasy Star 4 on the Sega Genesis. I like a lot the perspective of showing up the enemies as if they were right in front of you. The party members will appear at the bottom whenever you're selecting their action. It may seem irrelevant, but back then it was innovative from the regular first-person views in most turn-based RPGs. The animations whenever they attack are also really cool. For the first time, there were combination attacks, some of them pretty useful against bosses. There's not much to compare with the previous 3 games, as the menus, the options and the names of the attacks are pretty much the same. Phantasy Star 4 just has better controls and interface, and I know I've been saying this a lot, but I'm a balanced guy. I like my battle systems challenging, but not as hardcore as in the previous 2 games, which means there's still some grinding to do, but not that much. Overall, battles just flow faster and swifter, look cooler, difficulty is high but not frustrating, and it makes you abuse the skills, magics, buffs and debuffs more often and more strategically. For its time, it was an incredible improvement, and I'd say it still holds up nowadays quite formidably. Therefore, I think it's the best battle system in the series. Dragon Quest, another long-time running and extremely popular series. No need for an introduction, it's been turn-based forever, including most of its spin-offs. And the first game is pretty much the godfather of the genre in Japan. Iconic, classic and historically important, right? We all respect this series a lot, but the truth is its battle mechanics couldn't be more simple. And that's totally fine, it's earned the right to be that way, just like Final Fantasy. Except Dragon Quest has always stayed true to turn-based. So despite the simplistic nature of their battle mechanics, which one has the best of them all? Dragon Quest XI, of course! Sometimes JRPGs evolve for the bad, but sometimes they evolve for the good. Echoes of an elusive age to make things even better is not only the best, it's way more engaging and addictive than most of the others. In my opinion, of course. So instead of the classic first-person view, you can now see all the characters in the battlefield. The interface of the menus and the controls are great, not sluggish or hard to understand. One of the greatest features is the pep up setting. By pepping up, the character's status increases temporarily and can also gain bonus on several attributes. And if 2 or more party members are pepped up, they can do a combination attack. Although some are better paired up with a specific ally, they can mostly work together to benefit the battle. Other than that, characters can use physical, magical or skill attacks. Of course, exploiting the enemy's weaknesses is crucial to do more damage and have the advantage. Lastly, you know me, I love me some balance. This series is known for being a relentless group of corrosive grindfests. They can literally drain your gaming energy by leveling up all the time. Dragon Quest XI only does that during the post-game content, while the main story is completely balanced. In fact, the battle mechanics are so nice, it's actually a perfect entry for beginners into the series. Which prompts me to conclude this most recent entry has the best battle system of them all. Oh boy, here we go with the Atelier series. It's a franchise that has everything: unknown titles, hidden gems, popular releases, all among its several trilogies out there. Every single one, including the 2 Mana Kimia games, is a turn-based RPG, and I don't think any of them have a bad battle system. I love the combat in all of them. Which is the best then? Granted, most people will go for the innovative side of Ryza 1 and 2. They concur with Final Fantasy XIII's real-time turn-based system, but here you focus in only one character. You can also switch to another if you want to. Yes, it's a cool, slightly original and engaging system, but it ain't the best, not in my opinion. I'll pick the one in the DOS trilogy, specifically with Shally. It contradicts my statement of the more the merrier, I know, but the interface was so fast, powerful and immersive here that I didn't care about having only 3 party members per battle. After all, you can switch to the others at any time, but it's best to do that during the burst state. This is based on a gauge that allows the characters to do consecutive combos and massive damage to your enemies. It's quite easy to have the burst bar fill up, so you can even abuse it during regular battles. By performing assist attacks, the field burst can activate more frequently. You'll be able to choose one character to continue with the flow, and so on. As you can see, the enemy won't be able to do anything at all while the burst mode is on, so strategizing your moves is crucial with the bosses. It's always best to use an ultimate attack right before it ends, so you can do even more massive damage. The combat in this game was so brilliant that I can't fathom why it went away in the next trilogy. To me, it was the epitome of how enticing it was. So enticing I ended up beating the game twice in a row, but also because it's one of the very few titles in the series where you can choose between 2 main characters, and while the events are different, the gameplay remains the same, including most of the boss battles, but it was so good I didn't care one bit. Plus, it has one of the most kick-ass metal battle themes ever in a JRPG. Hearing that music every time I go into battle fills me up with strange energy. Overall, Shally has the epitome of the Atelier combat that far exceeded my expectations when I first played it. That's why I strongly believe it is the best, even above the popular system in Ryza. The Mana series have consistently been action RPGs, except for that abomination on the Nintendo DS that almost killed the franchise. Over the course of time, we've seen a migration from 2D basic or rather clunky systems to fast-paced action in 3D. I said clunky because honestly, I was never a big fan of any of the battle mechanics. All the original games, including Trials of Mana and Legend of Mana, have this technical dexterity that I didn't exactly love. I love those 2 games, but I gotta admit their combat wasn't one of the bigger reasons why. Along came some Nintendo DS games that also didn't stand out, right after the big failure of Dawn of Mana. In that game, the combat seemed at least more engaging, but the camera and controls ruined it all. So the remix of the first 3 games came about and they improved all of that, specifically the one in Trials of Mana, my pick for this video. So if the original was already better than its predecessors, imagine its remake. My first boon with it is that each character controls fairly different from one another. You will select your 3 playable characters at the beginning of the game and you'll be stuck with just them until it's over. That alone gives it high replay value, if at least to experiment with all the characters in battle. They all have 3 types of attack: light, heavy and special skills, which are bound to the character's class. Light attacks will give a small variety of combos, which are the regular type. You can charge the heavy attacks by holding down the button. This can help break the enemy's guard whenever they have them. The special skills are the most useful as they can both stagger and break the enemy, but they're simply used to do more damage. There are also combination attacks that your whole party can perform against your foes. You cannot directly control your party members, but you can choose which enemies they'll attack in the menu. And let me tell you, the AI is quite decent here. Depending on how you have them behave, they can indeed be pretty useful. Now, I've mentioned before that the camera is quite important in 3D action RPGs. In Trials of Mana, I admit it isn't that great, but it shouldn't pose a major problem. If you target a specific enemy, it locks on you and said enemy, so whenever that happens, it works just fine. Leveling up gives training points to characters that you can allocate to increase their battle capabilities. It's basically an ability system with moves and passive buffs, something that wasn't in the original game. and you can also change class, eventually. Only downfall of this remake is that the cooperative mode is gone. That was an extremely stupid decision from Square Enix, but whatever. Single player combat is great enough to stand on its own. Still the best battle system in the series. Like many JRPG series I've been analyzing so far, Breath of Fire is yet another one that got better with each entry. That is until the train wreck that 5 was, which completely changed the system to something obnoxious and catastrophic. Then the unspeakable mobile garbage tragically came into existence to ruin the whole series. Well, I'm picking the last true game as the one with the best battle system of them all, Breath of Fire 4. I have several reasons to crown it as the Prince of Combat here. Number 1, for its time, the fact that you had a full active party was very impressive. 3 characters can fight in the front row while the others can act as reserve in the back. You can switch to any of them at anybody's turn, and while being in reserve, they can gradually recover HP and MP. Number 2, the interface of the system was superb. As much as I loved Breath of Fire 3, I almost hated its small-ass menu, which was confusing most of the time and hard to get used to. The one in Breath of Fire 4 couldn't be easier to use, especially since you can now choose each character's action in any order. Number 3, the combos. This was a first for the series, and it may not seem that important, but then again, back then it was innovative. With the combo system, you can choose which skills or spells will be cast in order to take advantage of the battlefield. Actually, it may look irrelevant as well, but sometimes changing positions can also affect the flow of battle. I know characters are affected by status, and the higher their agility, the faster they are, but in Breath of Fire 4 you can use that to make the combo system even better. Number 4, I love the way it looks. Its isometric view was honestly a drag sometimes during navigation, but in battle it looked absolutely amazing. Especially with those hand-drawn sprites in all their pixel art glory. How can you not love these animations when they execute an attack or they cast magic? And number 5, the game lets you play with the main antagonist, and his skills are so OP that it's just amazing to experience his point of view. He's a one-man army, but just like Ryu, he can transform into a dragon anytime. I think those are enough reasons for me to position this combat as the best in the series. It truly became its pinnacle as the last great Breath of Fire in existence. The Shining series has been there for a long time, and it's tried a wide variety of battle mechanics that still holds up today. But at some point, it started focusing more and more into action than anything else, so it lost momentum. It was mostly known for its tactical RPG combat back at the early 90s, and in truth, it became one of the most influential and important of the genre. Along with Fire Emblem, Shining Force is practically the godfather of strategy JRPGs. We got back then a trilogy and also a few spin-offs on the Game Gear. 2 of them, direct sequels to the original Shining Force on the Genesis, were bundled up on a Sega CD release. The third main game, however, was met with a troublesome localization. It was released on 3 different volumes for the Sega Saturn in Japan, but the rest of the world only got the first part. That's when the series went dormant until it infamously came back on the Game Boy Advance with Shining Soul. I said infamously because that game was bad, now being a lame-ass action RPG. Sega refused to go back to tactics for a while, and it continued on this way until the latest released, Shining Resonance Refrain. So which game in the entire series has the best system? Obviously the strategy RPGs. But if you want to get the action part out of the way first, it could very well be Refrain. It was released on the PS3 exclusive to Japan until its enhanced port for modern systems. It's actually been compared several times to the Tales series for reasons you're seeing right now. Controls are decent and fast, not as great as in most of the Tales games, but they're alright. Party members will fight with their own weapons, but they can also manipulate song. With this type of magic, they can affect the battle, specifically by using the melodic attacks. Weapons are basically instrument themed, as they can also be used by releasing an attack called Force. It's actually quite engaging, this system, and I prefer it over its lowly predecessors or even its Diablo Musou clones. Shining Force EXA was great, but I think I'd rather go with the system in Resonance. However, not a single action RPG in this franchise can top the highly iconic and influential strategy RPGs. Shining Force 1 and 2 have simply the best system in the entire series. For the sake of choosing only one, I'll pick Shining Force 2, simply because the interface was improved. Everything else remained the same. Characters will move on grids, with their range depending on the weapon or accessory equipped, but mostly on their speed and their class. Upon making contact with an enemy, they will enter a different battle screen. Sometimes both friend and foe will counterattack, and sometimes they can even attack twice in a row. Amount of damage, probability of missing, and all that jazz depend on the legendary RNG, Random Number Generator. Characters can only have a handful of items equipped, which can make the healing somewhat troublesome, but that's also where the strategy comes in. Knowing which characters to move where or to use for attacking is very important, especially considering that the experience they gain is individual, as in most grid-based tactical RPGs. Terrain affects most characters' movement, but the same applies for your enemies. No permadeath here, so you can revive your character at church back in town after the battle is over. I personally think the battle system in these games was more friendly than the ones in the first Fire Emblem games. It was a good approach for beginners into the genre, and it's still nowadays if you want to get into, but in the retro way. Overall, Shining Force 2 has the best system in the series, regardless of the category of the genre.